Welcome to The Explainer. So today we are jumping into a really radical theory. This thing tries to tackle some of the biggest questions you can possibly ask. Questions about existence itself, consciousness, the very fabric of reality, and, get this, it claims it can solve all of them with just one single profound idea.
All right, let's just dive right in with, well, probably the deepest question of them all, right? Why is there something instead of just nothing? Why does anything exist at all?
And then you've got the mystery of, well, us. How does this inner world that we all have, our thoughts, our feelings, our consciousness, how does that connect to the physical world out there? The universe of atoms and energy.
And of course, we can't forget the weirdness of quantum physics. Why is it that when you just look at something at the tiniest level, the very act of observing it seems to change what happens? How is that even possible?
Okay, so there's this new framework called the Law of Eternal Recursive Manifestation, ERM for short, and it makes this incredible claim that it has a single key to unlock all three of these huge problems. That's a seriously ambitious idea, so let's break it down and see how it supposedly works. Now, what's really wild about this is that this huge theory, a theory that's trying to explain the entire cosmos, it's all built on one core idea, and it's an idea you can actually see all around you.
And that idea is called recursive self-reflection. Just think about it, right? Like when you point a video camera at the TV it's connected to, or when you stand between two mirrors. You start with one simple image, and it just creates this endless, super complex pattern by reflecting on itself over and over and over again.
So the ERM theory takes this whole idea and boils it down into one simple equation. And here's the kicker. The theory says this isn't just describing reality, it's the actual formula that creates it.
So let's look at the pieces here. The core claim is that reality, what they call the source or S, it all comes from information, I, reflecting on itself through awareness. And that act of self-reflection, the I squared part, that's what creates more reality for us to be aware of, which then gets reflected on again in a loop that just goes on forever.
Okay, I know, that sounds pretty abstract. Like, how does awareness actually do anything? Well, the theory has an answer for that. It proposes a specific mechanism, something it calls the witness operator.
Right, the witness operator, or W. You can kind of think of it as the process that takes all that fuzzy, ghost-like potential from the quantum world and bam! It snaps it into the solid, definite reality that we all experience every day.
And it's a two-step process that's actually pretty easy to grasp. First, consciousness notices one possibility out of all the others. It's like drawing a line in the sand. But then, and this is the crucial part, it records that choice. It locks it into reality. So that line isn't in the sand anymore. It's now carved in stone.
Now, this leads to a pretty staggering claim. What it's saying is that a quantum event doesn't become real just because particles bump into each other. No, it only becomes real when the information about it gets registered or recorded by a conscious observer. So the act of recording something is the act of creating it. Wild.
Okay, so that's the engine. Let's get to the payoff. How does this whole framework of recursive awareness actually try to solve those huge scientific problems we talked about at the beginning? First up, you've got the classic mind-body problem, right? How can your non-physical thought, I'm going to lift my arm, actually move your physical arm? Where does the energy come from? You can't just magically create it without breaking the laws of physics.
Well, ERM's solution is actually pretty clever. It says consciousness doesn't add any energy at all. It doesn't have to. Instead, it just acts like a selector. It chooses which reality to tune into from a whole menu of possibilities that already exist to the quantum level. It's kind of like changing the channel on a TV. All the shows are already being broadcast, you're just picking which one to watch.
All right, but that leads to another question. If awareness is so fundamental, if it's everywhere, then why do we need these complicated brains to experience it? Why isn't a rock conscious?
So according to this theory, your brain is basically a powerful antenna. It doesn't create the signal of consciousness. That signal is already out there, everywhere, just in a very weak, scattered form. The brain's job is to grab all that faint signal, focus it, and amplify it into the one sharp, coherent experience of you that you're having right this second.
And finally, we get to the really big one. What happens at the end of it all? Standard physics predicts something called the heat death of the universe. It's this idea that eventually everything will just cool down and spread out until it's all perfectly uniform and, well, completely dead and boring.
But ERM makes a totally stunning prediction here.
It says the heat death can't happen. It's impossible. And the logic is kind of mind-bending. It goes like this. A perfectly uniform universe would have no differences in it, right? And if there are no differences, there's no information. A state with zero information is basically the same thing as nothingness. And since the theory's first rule is that nothing can exist, the universe simply cannot reach that state. It has to reset itself before it gets there.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This is all starting to sound a little bit like philosophy, maybe even metaphysics. But the people behind ERM insist that nope, this is real science. It's a testable hypothesis, and they've laid out very specific ways you could prove it wrong.
In fact, you can try to break this theory at 3 different levels. First, in quantum labs, you could run tons of experiments to see if a person's state of mind really has any effect on quantum results. Second, in neuroscience, you could see what happens if you disrupt those feedback loops in the brain. Does consciousness just get fuzzy, or does it vanish completely? And third, in cosmology, we can just keep looking out into space. If the universe keeps expanding toward a perfect heat death with no weirdness, then the theory is wrong.
And this is super helpful for seeing where ERM fits in with other big theories out there. For example, unlike integrated information theory, it says consciousness is fundamental, not just something that pops up when things get complicated. And unlike cubism, it gives a specific how, that W equals N composed with R thing, for how we affect reality. And I love this twist on the simulation hypothesis. It basically says, yeah, we're in a simulation, but there's no programmer. We are programming ourselves.
So at the end of the day, what you've got here is a really, really ambitious shot at doing what physicists have been dreaming about for 100 years. To finally unite the inner world of our minds with the outer world of the cosmos, all under one single elegant idea: recursive self-reflection.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last, very provocative question. If this theory is even a little bit right, if our awareness is the engine that manifests reality, then what reality are you creating right now in this very moment?